Good morning. I'm Betsy Stites, the president of the Woodbury Cottage Grove League of Women Voters, and we are really excited to have everyone here today. I'd especially like to welcome our legislative panels. After the events of Wednesday, today's session is even more important. It really is an opportunity to reinforce the importance of our league, but also the importance of having our legislators here, providing their views in a stable, respectful, integrated way that really reinforces all the work that we do to inform our citizens and empower our democracy. Since its inception in October 19th, 1999, the League of Women Voters of Minnesota have developed positions on a variety of issues through an intensive process of study and consensus making. We then can advocate for those positions at the legislature and other levels of government. You can find all those positions identified on the League of Women Minnesota website. The League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to help increase understanding of major public policy issues and help to influence public policy through education and advocacy. One of the most important parts and a principle of the League is that we are nonpartisan. We do not support any opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, but we always work on vital issues of concern to members and the public. The League holds nonpartisan candidate forums, which hopefully many of you attended. We run nonpartisan voter registration drives and advocate on a number of limited issues. Today's legislative interviews offer an opportunity to expand our understanding of the issues confronting the 2021 legislature, but it also gives us an opportunity to connect more personally with the representatives that we have elected. We will be joining the recording that's already in progress, and our legislators are answering the following question. We would like to get better acquainted with you and what you hope to accomplish this legislative session. Please state your name, your Senate district, the committees you will be on or hope to be on, and your top 2 priorities for the legislative session. Tell us why these priorities are important to you, to your constituents, and how they will improve or impact the lives of your constituents. Have a good rest of the session.
Minnesota as the worst state in the union for retirees, and that's just one part of it. But that's something that I would like to see addressed at some point. So that's something that I'll continue to work on this year.
All right, thanks, Tony. And Susan.
So I'm going to answer this question, one at a very global level and one at a very specific. So on the global level, as we've said, it's a year for a balanced budget. And I agree, we need to do it in a proper way with multiple omnibus bills, not big giant ones. But one of the things that I've been talking about is we know that this pandemic has not affected everybody equally, that it has been disproportionately borne by our frontline workers, our essential workers, and we are not getting it's fundamental fairness, right? So what my concern is we go through this, and as still the only divided legislature in the country, if there's too much of an emphasis on cutting, those cuts always tend to fall on the same groups of people. Education cuts, those will be borne by local property taxpayers through local levies, or it comes back to parents and families in the form of fees. That's one very simple example of how that works. So I want to make sure that when we balance this budget, that we don't do so on the backs of the people who are already struggling in this pandemic. And the other thing that I will address is something that I've been working on for years. I've had some success over the years, but we want to keep doing more. It's more important than ever, and that has to do with student support services, counselors, psychologists, social workers, nurses, chemical dependency. Those are the professionals who are going to be able to best support our kids as they're coming through this incredibly difficult time and trying to have the resources to continue to heal.
All right, thank you. Susan. Vivian? for the next questions.
All right. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about COVID-19. According to the Minnesota Department of Health's website on December 28th, 2020, the largest number of cases of COVID-19 was from community spread. Additionally, the age group with the highest number of cases was ages 20 through 24. More than 410,000 Minnesotans have tested positive for COVID-19, and more than 5,000 Minnesotans have died from the virus. With this information in mind, has Minnesota taken the necessary steps to reduce or prevent the spread of COVID-19 and the death of its citizens? What can be done to further reduce these numbers and bring us back to a healthy and productive state? We're going to start with two.
Oh, thank you, Vivian. I almost did not recognize you.
Oh, thank
Like
you.
chair, yes, it's wonderful. I think what Minnesota has done, what Governor Walz has done is something that we've been really trying really hard to stop the spread. Temporarily closing down businesses. I know we've just recently, very, very recently, just this past week, I started to open up back to 50% capacity, trying to balance, businesses and the need for those businesses to survive. We're also being very cognizant of, the high number of infections and deaths. But I think part of it is, we can't close our borders, right? We have travelers that are from other states that are coming and going, and so it's a difficult balance. Sorry, my time's up.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Carla?
Yeah, it's been a difficult road. It's been a difficult road when there's been really no plan ahead of time from the federal government when we knew about this, and no collaboration really between the federal government and the state government. States have been on their own. And as a former local elected official, I kind of know how that feels sometimes when states and feds leave you out on your own. And it's been tragic. It's been difficult. Representative Juergens and I have been on countless calls with businesses and other organizations in our district. And it's been difficult. I think the vaccine, we need cooperation from the feds, and that'll help speed this up and along. Again, the legislature needs to pass a plan to be a real partner with the governor in resolving this pandemic and getting the virus under control.
Great. Thank you, Carla. Tony?
Well, whether you think that the state has done enough or not falls squarely on one man's shoulders, and that's Governor Walz. Through his emergency powers and his executive orders, it has completely bypassed the legislature. And so I agree with Senator Bigham. There needs to be a plan. I've seen nothing coming from the leadership in the House along those lines. In my opinion, they've completely abdicated their legislative responsibilities, and there needs to be a plan. We need to get people, we need to include the legislature in those decisions. Every one of these executive orders could go through a committee process, could have people come in and testify, could listen to the experts, both for and against. And that's the way government is supposed to work, and it hasn't. We've had the governor basically legislating from the executive branch.
Thank you, Tony. Susan?
Well, my problem with Representative Juergens' response is that it ignores the fact that we have a house of a body in the Minnesota legislature that is controlled by Republicans who have not done exactly what he's talking about. So, it's fine to throw that rhetoric around. And I just want to say, I think we all need to be really careful with the rhetorical bomb throwing these days. Some of the communications I see targeted at Governor Walz are beyond the pale. I believe he's tried to do a good job. He'll be the first to say it hasn't been perfect, but as Senator Brigham said, without a strong federal response, we've had to manage and juggle the various forms of support and protection that Minnesotans need. And that includes managing the virus and keeping people healthy and safe. But that also means that we have employees who need those businesses to be open, and we need those businesses to thrive for our communities, and we need our schools to be open for our kids. And, you know, I think that we've done a pretty good job considering the nature of this challenge. This is a big question with a 1-minute answer, you know, I'm hopeful that with new leadership in Washington that we will get the support that will allow us to better support employees and workers so that we can keep people safe as we get the vaccine in people's arms and get through this.
Thank you, Susan. Steve?
Thanks, Vivian. I've supported the governor, Commissioner Malcolm, and the advice and support that we've heard from Dr. Osterholm through this crisis of the COVID. I also think that the legislature, particularly the House, as well as the majority in the Senate, need to put aside much of the differences that we've had and speak reasonably and cooperatively. That's absolutely essential. I think going forward, the executive orders of the governor are going to be reduced. And I think that, as Tony suggested, there will be more conversation, discussion within both legislative bodies. In the meantime, and I speak about this frequently, there's a responsibility between personal liberties and social responsibilities in a democracy. We need, as a society, to take on the responsibilities of acting as if we want to end this quickly. We need to mask up. We need to keep our distance. We need to respect the importance of our neighbors and our loved ones, and work together on this. And that's really an important issue.
Thank you, Steve. My next question is, will you get the vaccine when it becomes available to you? Why or why not? And I'd like to start with Carla.
Yes, because it's the right thing to do. It's going to work. It's going to keep me safe. It's going to keep others safe. And it's going to make it so the Capitol can open up and we can be back in person. It's going to make it so that when people want to go visit their loved ones in long-term care, you don't have to worry about their health. And it makes it so that our kids can go back in schools. And it makes it that we're keeping our neighbors and loved ones safe and doing the right thing. So absolutely, I have no problem getting the vaccination. People should do it, and you should get your flu shot. Record low this year for all flu. It was a fascinating story on the news this morning on all levels about the low levels of infection and deaths from the flu because of all the practices that we're taking in.
Great, thank you, Carla. Tony?
Yes, but I want to be clear. I don't think that legislators should be stepping in front of anybody else to get the vaccine. And I'm hoping that by the time we get the first responders vaccinated, the healthcare workers, teachers, and starting with the oldest and most vulnerable Minnesotans, maybe by the time it gets to a young guy like me, we won't even need it. But no, I'm not afraid of it at all. And if the opportunity, I mean, if it's still necessary by the time it gets to me, absolutely.
Thank you, Tony. Susan?
Okay, I swear I'm clicking that unmute button. Absolutely, when it is my turn, and I agree that we should not be giving special consideration to members of the legislature, but when it is my turn, I definitely will get the vaccine. And it's not just for me, because I know that these are the ways that we are going to bring down the overall presence of the virus in our communities, and that's going to keep everybody safe. And that's how we're going to get our lives, our kids, our schools, our families, our businesses back to normal.
Thank you. Steve?
Yes, I will get the jab, and for the same reasons that each of my colleagues has suggested. It's absolutely essential.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Jody.
Did Tu have a answer to the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss Tu? I am so sorry, Tu. Thank you. Tu?
Oh, yes, I will, for all the above reasons that my colleagues mentioned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tu, and thanks, Vivian. Our next question is about climate change. You have 1 minute to answer this question as well. Climate change is key to the health and safety of Minnesota. How much of the $900 billion relief package funding will be allocated to Minnesota? And what one piece of legislation will you support from the legislature related to climate change in 2021? And let's begin with Tony.
I have no idea if there are any, or if there's going to be any, what the amount is that'll come and any legislation that'll deal with climate change. So we've only had bills being introduced for a couple of days, and I'm not aware of any so far, but I'm sure there will be some.
Thank you, Tony. Susan?
So I agree. We don't know the details of the federal package yet. And so we can't really answer that. And it's always highly prescriptive. We don't get a lot of flexibility on how that goes. One thing I will say is that in terms of legislation, I'm going to cheat here and I'm going to do two. One is clean energy and the jobs that can bring. And those need to be good jobs. Those need to be, as we're moving out of a traditional energy economy that have a lot of labor jobs, we can't now replace those with low wage jobs. We have to have good jobs for folks and make those good labor jobs for working families. But I also want to say that this discussion about transportation is huge. It is now the #1 source of greenhouse gases in our environment. So we have to take that seriously. We have to have a serious conversation about clean cars and making sure that Minnesotans has access to the cars that they want to buy that right now they're having trouble getting.
Thank you, Susan. Steve?
Thanks. There are so many issues that are facing us. They're just really overwhelming. Climate change is absolutely essential that we step forward in this. I'll have a bill dealing with the providing incentives for cities and contractors to use geothermal heating and cooling in residential and commercial development. It's a clean energy initiative. It reduces impact on the environment, and it would provide more construction jobs and also more jobs as far as commercial and economic development are concerned. But Jody, you're right, that it's an issue that we can't set aside.
Thanks, Steve. Two?
Yeah, so I think from the 900 billion relief package, I only know this because we had a meeting on it in the climate caucus the other day. I think it was like 35 billion in renewable energy, which I think is not enough to really bring on, the jobs or the, changes that we need to really address the climate change issue. But I think, we can work on, sort of tax incentives or investment in infrastructure that can help, encourage practices that will be good for our environment, and also investing in infrastructures that can really help spur the growth for, clean energy. So,
Thank you, too.
Yeah.
Oh. Were you finished? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I thought you were, okay, thank you. And then Carla.
Yeah, I think green energy is the key. It's the future. As I've toured our trades, so the insulators and the pipe fitters and laborers and carpenters and all these folks, they're ready, they're willing, they want to be able to provide those good union jobs to transition to a green economy. And as Tu was saying, or Steve, about the geothermal, all that stuff is good jobs. It's going to help our environment. I agree with Susan. We've got to do something about auto emissions and moving forward on that. I am so happy that we are going to have an administration that believes in science and will repeal back some of the horrible environmental policies that President Trump has implemented. I also will say my focus has always been and always will be on removing PFAS from our systems, which contaminates our water in each of our districts. So I will continue to introduce legislation on that issue as well.
Thank you, Carla. Vivian?
Thank you, Jody. I'd like to move to redistricting. Redistricting only happens every 10 years. This means that for most legislators, redistricting is an entirely new process for them. What is your understanding of redistricting? If it's new to you, what areas of the process are you interested in learning more about? Or what questions stand out in your mind about the redistricting process? And let's start with Susan.
So yes, this was, I mean, I actually came in on the new maps after the last round of redistricting. So I have not participated in it in the process as a legislator, but we have been debating these issues. We've been hearing bills. We have been, working on this over the years in preparation for this round. So, it will be an interesting, with the divided legislature. I believe it was Steve who said earlier that, he hopes, and I agree, that we can get to some sort of legislative agreement, but, the history shows us that our current situation means it's likely to be resolved by the courts, but we're going to be there. We have our redistricting committee set, ready to go in the Senate. We're going to go through that process. We're hiring staff right now to actually work on it. And so, the point is that, as we all say, voters need to pick their representatives. Representatives don't need to pick their voters. We need to make sure we have principles in place that ensure that fairness, ensure that our elections are representative of our communities, and we get the people to represent us that reflect our communities.
Great. Steve?
Thanks. Redistricting is maybe the most complicated of the issues that we face because it deals with the foundations of democracy. We talk about one person, one vote, and that's an easy idea to understand. On the other hand, the demographics of this nation, and certainly of our state, are changing dramatically and quickly. One person, one vote is an ideal, but as our population changes, we want to make sure that all individuals and all interest groups are represented. How do we make sure that communities of color are maintained, and so that their representation is not divided between districts and diluted? How do we make sure that growing populations like the suburbs, which have the opportunities of education and wealth, and they're balanced with communities that are having more difficult time? This is really a tough one, and as Susan says, it's a real challenge.
Thank you, Steve. Two?
Yeah, for me, like my colleagues, we want our redistricting to be fair, proportional, and not favoring one political party over another. And I think what's most important, mostly for Minnesotans, is that the process is fair, or how we come about drawing those legislative districts, how that process is fair, that we as legislators, as we are negotiating or putting that plan together, that we are doing it in a transparent and principled manner in reaching that agreement between those of us in the legislature. And so that's my hope, and I would, help out in any way I can.
Thank you, too. Let's hear from Carla.
Thank you. Redistricting, I've actually never been part of it either because I retired from the House before the last one. So, but I do know this, that Minnesotans voted for DFL senators. Oh, Susan, you might have to help me out here. I think it's about 100,000 plus. And yet they got the majority. So it just shows you that the districts have had a shift. And so it's important that that does reflect our community in a fair way. And I think that it's going to be a fascinating process. I think, and maybe the other question will get to this, but there are some reforms I think that need to be discussed. I hope redistricting when it comes to elections are not the only reforms. For a long time in the Senate, the Republicans have held up some really important, incredible election reforms that need to happen, especially with mail. Representative Juergens and I have townships that can't do mail-in only, even if they want to, and that's not local control. So.
Thank you, Carla. Tony?
No, I'm not on the House Redistricting Committee this year, so the only time I'll likely have any proposal is when it comes to the House floor. And what I know is this, that the final maps should be a compromise between Republicans and Democrats. We have the only divided legislature in the country. Because if it's not, then it'll get thrown to the courts, and like it has the last 2 times. So I'm hoping to see that compromise between Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate. And as far as potential reforms, I'm not sure yet what proposals the House majority will bring forward. But I
Okay,
did have a nice conversation with Chair Mary Murphy the other day. I know she's looking forward to the challenge.
All
great.
those conversations with Mary Murphy are wonderful.
So, starting with Steve, I just have a quick question. Do you have any thoughts about potential reform for the redistricting process that we have in Minnesota today?
Oh, I do, and I think that the league has a really important role to play, along with other civic organizations. I want to make sure that individuals as well as organizations have a voice in this, and I'll write to Representative Murphy today to make sure that there are adequate public hearings so that all of us have a chance, all individuals have a chance to express their ideas. Two talked about fairness. And what is fairness? And that's I suppose a philosophical, but it becomes a real political issue as well. So the reform of citizen participation, a re-examination of the idea of fairness, and attention to what this idea of one person, one vote really means.
Thank you, Steve. Two, do you have comments on this one?
Yeah, so as we were door knocking this or making phone calls this past year, we kind of assume, those of us that has been in the legislature, we kind of assume that folks kind of know what we're talking about too. But we at the legislature, we have the Redistricting Committee, which is chaired by the famous Mary Murphy. And so that committee, we're hoping that we can bring in folks from the community and from the public to come and testify and provide their perspective on, what the redistricting process should be, or opinions that they have. And so really encourage folks to tune in, to follow that committee and be involved. And so I think that's a good way to get started and going forward with redistricting.
Thank you, too. Carla, did you have any additional comments on this question?
I would say that when you look at the makeup, at least on our side of the aisle in our branch of or body of the legislature, this isn't a partisan committee, shouldn't be. And so I think one of the focuses on geographic balance, so that there are voices on this legislative committee that are from all over the state. And I haven't looked at the House members, but at least in the Senate, you have greater Minnesota folks, you have urban, and you have suburban. And I think it's not about Democrat, Republican, it's about geographic balance, so all those voices are heard. Obviously, I think the last time that any plan has been signed into law was under Carlson, and I think that was a mistake. I think it was he filed something incorrectly, and so the districts went in there. But I was in elementary school, so I don't. But I think it's a problem that the legislature isn't able to do that, and it goes to the court. So I'd like to ultimately see a nonpartisan panel of maybe retired judges take a look at this and then submit it to the legislature. Something like that I would like to see.
Great. And I know, Tony, you said that you didn't have comments on this, but I think if you have additional comments, we'd like to hear them.
No,
About
just I'm not
reforms?
aware of any of the plans that might come forward this session. So we'll just have to see what comes through that committee.
Great. Thank you so much. And so finally, Susan.
In terms of potential reforms, to really make a difference, we would have to have changes to our Constitution, which requires an amendment. But there are statutory changes that could be made, probably not in time for this cycle, but I do think these are things we need to continue to look at. And I definitely support looking at some sort of objective, nonpartisan body to do that for Minnesota. But part of the thing, and this gets a little weedy, but you know, what we're really talking about is, and when I use the word principle, I don't mean this in just like a generic way. This is the principles of redistricting. Some people might propose we ought to have incumbent protection. I'm not going to go there. Some people would say we need to have really small contiguous districts. Some say we need to protect political boundaries and make sure things line up with cities or counties or whatever. These are specific points that we consider and balance as we make these maps. And some get prioritized versus others. We need to do that in a rational way. We need to follow good objective principles that focus on the communities. And those are where the reforms need to lie.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to turn it back to Jody now.
Thanks, Vivian. Now let's change gears and discuss Restore the Vote. You'll have 1 minute to answer these questions. So currently, some Minnesota citizens have previously been convicted of a felony, but not incarcerated and live in their community. However, these individuals may not vote until they complete their probation or supervised release. Some believe that the state of Minnesota should restore voting rights to these individuals. Do you agree with this? Why or why not? And let's begin with Susan.
You know, the very first time I had to chance to really dive into this issue was in preparation for this League of Women Voters event 9 years ago. And it was a real eye-opener for me in the beginning of my journey on this one. It was very surprising to me to learn that Minnesota tends to have much shorter actual sentences and much longer probation. And so the nature of that process disenfranchises more than 53,000 Minnesotans who are unable to vote because they're in this sort of nowhere land for a long, long time. We know that voting rights are a sign of civic engagement, and they are bringing people into their communities and giving them a sense of ownership. There's data that shows that. So I strongly support that. We have supported Restore the Vote in the past and would definitely do so if the Senate Republicans would give it a hearing this time.
Thanks, Susan. Steve?
I absolutely agree that individuals who have served their time while incarcerated and are participating in our society again should have a chance to exercise the franchise. If we believe that incarceration is anything more than simply a penalty, then we ought to endorse the idea. I think that if we expect people to have a real faith and a feeling of ownership, we ought to give them an opportunity to participate. And I think that individuals should have that opportunity of all citizens.
Thank you, Steve, too.
Yeah, I agree with Steve, and I think one aspect of our criminal justice system is the rehabilitative part of it. You know, we like what Steve said, use like faith. You know, we're trying to rehabilitate folks. You know, we're not just there just to punish people or not give. Yeah, I think Americans, we believe in second chances, and if you served your time, there should be a pathway to, getting the right to vote. And so that's where I stand.
Thank you, too. Carla?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I do support. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and so I'm hoping this does come up. And also, just as a side note, like this is actually a bipartisan issue. This isn't just a one-sided issue. It's the right thing to do for our democracy. Here's the other thing. I learned this being a former Washington County commissioner. It's easier for elections people when there's a clear say in what who votes and who doesn't. And sometimes communications can get lost, don't get through. And so you're disenfranchising people unintentionally that way. If you had a clear stance on it, then the elections officials would know. And so as Susan said, I mean, I'm going to go back further, Susan. I've been dealing with this since 2007 when I got into the House. I mean, this is something that probably should have been handled a long time ago, and more states are doing it either through initiative and referendum, which we do not have, or through legislation, which we should do.
Thank you, Carla. Tony?
Well, with all due respect to my friend, Representative Raymond Dean, former state representative Ray Dean, who was a strong proponent of Restore the Vote, I would say no. I think actions have consequences.
All right. Thank you. Now back to Vivian for the next question.
Okay, I am going to continue with the legislative process and public participation. The legislature has been passing laws in fewer, larger omnibus bills every year since the 1970s. Some believe these large omnibus bills violate the single subject clause of the Minnesota Constitution. Additionally, negotiations between legislative leadership often stalls, leading to last-minute deals behind closed doors. What is your opinion of these practices? How might they be improved to ensure greater transparency and public participation? And I am going to start with Steve Sandell.
Thanks. In 2018, the legislature presented the governor with a single large omnibus bill, a supplementary budget bill, and it was vetoed by by Mark Dayton. It was a real problem because it didn't allow the Republican majority in the House to represent it or enact its ideas, and it didn't really give the minority in either house to have a chance to express their ideas. I heard former Representative Annie Claflin from Tony and Carla's district talk about this, and she said that the importance of an omnibus bill that comes out of a committee shows that there's a kind of a cohesive idea about the approach that committee, whether it's education or whether it's judiciary or environment, takes. And I think I thought that was really a good idea that Annie suggested. On the other hand, some of those bills include some very controversial small bills, which I think might be taken out of that and talked about individually.
Great, thank you, Steve. Two.
Yeah, I would agree with Steve. I think there's a balancing act. Omnibus bills, like specific for a field of law that comes out of a committee. I think that makes sense for efficiency and the timeliness of it. We are a part-time legislature. We're there from January till sometimes till May, and so I think it goes into the efficiency of it. But I understand that issue of specific importance, like a specific piece of bill, I think that needs to be taken out and debated thoroughly between those of us in the legislature. And so I think there's a balancing act that comes with it.
Great, thank you, Stu. Carla?
Well, I'm gonna pick on my friend Susan right now. Senator Kent, what are the famous two words that I've been saying to you for like the last I don't know, 8 weeks? What are the two words I say you should never forget?
Conference committee?
Yes. So here's the problem is that, I heard the 70s were nice, but I would say that it's getting more and more partisan and political, and that's why people are doing it. Let's just say it as it is. I'm old enough to remember that we would have scheduled days of policy finance. So you'd pass ag finance policy. One day, ag finance next. Yeah, some late nights. But the fact of the matter is that's our job. And they do violate the single subject matter. And I'm surprised there aren't more constitutional challenges to that. We've got to do our job. We've got to go to conference committees. I have told Susan that for 8 weeks. There's two words you got to keep saying: conference committees. We do not need a trifecta balancing this budget. The legislature should have ownership in it, and we're going to do it. And the rank and file need to stand up and demand it.
Well, thank you, Carla. Now we'll go on to Tony.
The interesting thing is I'm starting my third term. And so the prior 4 years, when this question has come up, everybody agrees that the omnibus bills are bad. And when you're in the minority, you rail against the majority about how horrible they are. And then when those same people find themselves in the majority, guess what we have? Big omnibus bills. And we can I bet we could go through the House and the Senate, get agreement that we all want to see the omnibus bills go away, and come the end of May, we're going to see big omnibus bills again. And for the last budget, as an example, I think the end product was pretty good. I think the process to get there was horrible. When you basically have the governor and the two majority leaders negotiated the entire bill. Many of us sat around in our offices waiting to get called back in to vote, and then it was take it or leave it. This is it. This is the agreement. That's what I think is bad, and I do think that it is a violation of our Constitution.
Thank you. Really appreciate the answers on this one this year. Susan,
Well, I have a few things to say about this one. And I will start by saying I agree with what's been said here. As we were going through the election cycle this past time around, I spoke with Speaker Hortman routinely and said that if I would be the Senate Majority Leader, I would be committed to a much better process. Carla's right. Conference committees is a huge part of that. That's where the differences should be worked out. There are, as we've discussed, a role for omnibus bills. As Steve described, when you give the Education Committee their budget to allocate across different initiatives, that's rational. To have a policy omnibus bill that you just put a lot of technical minor things in, that just makes sense, it's efficient. And better policy, stronger, more meaningful policy things should go to the floor by themselves. But this gets abused, and the question is why? And that is because people are trying to sneak things into bills that they know they don't want to try to publicly defend in a conference committee or on the floor or in a public way. And so that's why I agree with Carla. We all need to fight for that. We all need to stand up for it. And the problem, to Tony's point, I'm going to take a few more seconds here, is that even with divided government, to get to the compromises, even if the speaker really wishes we would not do these inappropriate omnibus bills that go beyond what we think is reasonable and appropriate, to get to an agreement, that's what has to happen. So that's why we need to get back to conference committees and doing this in a much more transparent process.
thank you, Susan. Going to turn it back over to Jody.
Thanks, Vivian. Our final question before the audience questions is on policing in Minnesota. You have 1 minute to answer this question. The death of George Floyd placed a microscope on policing in Minnesota, while the legislature took steps to change policing practices such as eliminating choke holds, neck restraints, and warrior-style training. Many citizens do not feel enough was done to hold individual bad actors accountable. What additional legislation would we or can we expect to see in the ongoing conversation about policing? And let's start with 2.
Yeah, I think we talked a bit about this towards the end of last year with the League of Women Voters. When the murder of George Floyd occurred, we had a couple of weeks to get some legislation together, and we were fortunately able to get some stuff done, like you mentioned. But I know there's still more work to do. It's not going to be fixed overnight, nor will I think it'll be fixed this coming session. But that doesn't mean that we stop working on it. I think there's still a few things that we were looking at, sort of like the police, certification board, some of the negotiation that goes into hiring and firing. And so there's still a few things that we're working on to bring some accountability to how our police force functions and how local governments hire and stuff like that.
Thank you, too. Carla?
So I think what we passed last year is a start. I do believe there'll be further conversations. What specific legislation? I don't know. I'm in the minority in the Senate. I will be serving on Judiciary Committee. And so I know that there'll probably be discussions. I hope there'll be discussions because everybody deserves to feel safe in their community. Everybody deserves to have the wonderful relationships and experiences that I had growing up with police officers. Every child, every kid, every parent wants that. I think we have a lot of discussions to continue to have. And the point being that everybody needs to be at the table. And so everybody has to have input in it. We can't go around and pretend that we know how to do a law enforcement's job when we're not law enforcement. And so we got to have them at the table. We can't pretend to know what it is like to be, at least people that are not people of color, to be people of color in a community. We've got to listen and we've got to have everybody at the table. So that's my commitment when dealing with these issues.
Thank you, Carla. Tony?
A year ago, I did several ride-alongs with law enforcement in my district to see firsthand how they do their job, the challenges that they face. And then in the summer, I went back and I went through the departments and did ride-alongs again, and whenever possible with the same officers, officers and deputies. And what I saw was everybody that I rode with and everybody that was working that we came in contact with, I saw respect. I saw them helping the public. I didn't see bad actors, although nobody says that there aren't bad actors in law enforcement. I saw people that really care about the public and really care about their jobs. Here's my fear, and I might go a little over time here. My fear is this: there are more job openings in law enforcement, fewer people wanting to go into the profession. And what I hope doesn't happen is that in order to fill those slots, that they have to lower the standards. I think they need to raise the standards on the hiring side and on the background checks on the side to let's prevent those bad actors before they actually get hired. Because the vast majority of law enforcement, they're there for the right reason. They love their jobs and they're doing the right things. And that's what we need to focus on, is those that are doing it correctly. And we need to support them in that endeavor.
Thanks, Tony. Susan?
So, I think it's important to realize, and, from this conversation, I agree, what we were able to do in July was an amazing and important first step, but there's definitely still more work to be done. Unfortunately, the Judiciary Committee Chair in the Senate, Senator Warren Limmer, has already made it clear that he's not interested in doing a lot of this work, and it is likely to be held up in committee, which I think is just hugely unfortunate. I will remind you that it was a member of the Senate GOP in this context who said that he believed that racism is a sidebar, and I think that is unfortunate. What I would say about the July effort, and to Carla's point, we did have members of law enforcement at the table because we absolutely have to work together to do this. Folks understand that there are real important changes that need to be made, but these are complicated. And so it's going to take a little more time, and it's going to take the willingness from all sides to come to the table and work on it. Any workplace, if you have somebody who is violating policies, you need to be able to remove them from your workplace. And that has been a challenge. And I agree with Representative Juergens. The vast majority of law enforcement are committed to doing the right thing, and good committed people to the idea of protecting and serving all members of the community. But we have to be able to manage this overall process for the workforce. So that, and those are some of the reforms that we still need to continue doing.
Thank you, Susan. And Steve.
Thanks, Jody. I certainly have supported the work of law enforcement in Woodbury. I've had conversations with the Director of Public Safety, Lee Vague. I think he's a thoughtful person, effective in his administration, and dedicated to improvement. On the other hand, I know that our Department of Public Safety is not racially diverse, and we have to work on that. And we can't just say, let's work on it. We have to do something about it. I have had I've depended on the work of law enforcement in Woodbury lately, and my experience was, I have to say, extraordinary. They were terrific. They were paid attention and attentive. On the other hand, I serve on the Committee on Racial Justice, and I have to say that racial justice depends on economic justice. Economic justice means that it is an integrated effort, and we have to make sure that all individuals have opportunities in education and in health, and certainly in economic opportunities. And as our society grows in its dedication and its effect in justice, hopefully law enforcement will be, in fact, peace officers rather than individuals who act differently.
Thank you, Steve. Now back to Vivian for our audience questions.
All right. So our audience questions were submitted in advance. We have 7 questions. We're going to try to get through as many of them as possible. Would like to ask the legislators to try to keep your answers under a minute, if at all possible, so that we can get through more. So our first question is, what can we do to bridge the urban and rural divide? And now you need to know who goes first. That would be Carla.
Thank you. I think listening, visiting, experiencing, I go all over the state, and listen and see the experiences that other folks are doing in their communities. And I'm going to continue to do that. And I think that's a commitment we all should make. Two, we all have the same opportunity to use our voice and support each other. I think, honestly, we need to get border-to-border broadband. I'd like to see more investment in that. And that's come up short a couple times since I've been there. And I haven't been in the majority. So I'll leave it at that. Got to walk the walk. We're going to talk the talk, right? Oh, wait, other way around. You get what I mean? And then access to healthcare in rural Minnesota is a big problem. They're getting shut down because there's a business side of that. And so we've got to work to get quality healthcare access to folks. And again, the disparities in education funding, it falls a little bit more on property taxes because of the lack of diverse valuations out there. So I'm sorry I went over, not under. Sorry, Vivian.
Great. Thank you. Tony?
I referenced earlier my discussion that I had with Representative Mary Murphy, and one of the things that we talked about, and I told her that what I thought was concerning was, depending on where you are in the state, with this, the election results are so one-sided. If you're in certain districts that are Democrat, it doesn't matter who the Democrat is, who the Republican is, they're going to win. And the same can be said in some of the areas of Minnesota. That the Republican is going to win there. It doesn't matter who the candidates are. And that to me is a big problem. And it underscores the differences that you're talking about with the urban and rural divide. And she also mentioned in her time in the legislature how she's noticed that there are fewer and fewer rural legislators because the population concentration is more in the metro area, the suburbs and the city. And so the districts geographically in the rural parts of the state have gotten bigger. I don't know the solution to that other than I'm being a suburban Republican. The majority of our members are out in the rural area. And so it's just up to the few of us in the metro area to keep talking to them and letting them know life is different here than it might be in your district. And we can't all just see things the same way. We have to take that into consideration.
Thank you. Susan?
So I think, what both Carla and Tony have said is really important about listening and people being able to hear each other and appreciate each other's situations and perspectives. I've also had the opportunity to tour around the state and attend meetings. It is hard because it feels like there's just a real misunderstanding of some of the things that are very real. For example, and part of the problem is when people use, again, it's the rhetorical bomb throwing as political point scoring, and they, in the process, are creating misunderstandings of reality. So, for example, there were all sorts of attacks this year on a political basis about defunding the police, which is not the position held by certainly anybody at this group, but when you look at what the practical aspect is when Republicans want to cut budgets, they want to cut local government aid and county program aid. And those are local funds that support public safety in our local communities. So you create this perception of one thing that's not true, and it makes it much harder to govern and to come together around real facts and real policy decisions that matter. Sorry, I went over. This is a big question.
It's a tiny question, but it's got a lot of power to it.
Yes.
So, Steve.
I believe that each of us is elected as a state representative or a state senator, and that's and I believe that I bring a perspective of District 53B, Woodbury, to the legislature. But when I consider legislation, I consider it, first of all, is it good for the state? If it's good for the state, it will be good for Woodbury. And whether we're talking about economics or whether we're talking about health or education or our natural environment, that perspective I think is important. There are members of our caucus who can't vote against issues like gun safety because they know that their constituents will act negatively if they support it. There are people within our caucus who feel strongly about issues relating just to the city, but we have to talk about ourselves as state legislation. We have to make sure that our decisions are based as what's good for this state and good for this region. You know, these political boundaries are less important than the welfare of the society we live in.
Great. Thank you, Steve. 2?
I'll try to keep it under a minute. Yeah, what Representative Jurgens mentioned, you know, appreciating the differences that we have. I think that's the key word. You know, Representative Baker, a Republican in rural Minnesota, you know, I was talking to him and he told me, like, you know, you're talking about transportation and public transportation, but how am I going to communicate that to my constituent who lives in a rural area where there's no traffic jams, to one of your constituents who has to drive to work, you know, spend an hour to drive to work? And so, you know, really appreciating each other and the constituents that are in our districts. So I think that's a key thing.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jody.
Thanks, Vivian. And continuing with our questions from our audience, currently persons with a permit to carry can bring weapons into the Minnesota Capitol complex. In light of armed citizens threatening the Michigan legislature and this week's assault on the US Capitol, do you think that we will see legislation this year to limit the ability to carry dangerous weapons in the Minnesota Capitol complex? Why or why not? And we begin with Susan.
In a very practical way, I have to say, I don't think we're going to, if we see legislation, I'd be surprised. And if we were to pass that kind of legislation, I'd be astounded. I would, however, support it, and I would vote with enthusiasm to do it.
Thanks, Steve. And Susan?
I would imagine that a bill like that would be introduced. I doubt it will get any traction, but I do think this is a serious conversation we need to have. I think we all cherish the people's house nature of the Minnesota Capitol when it is fully open, which it is really not right now because of COVID and some security concerns. But if you think about what happened in Washington the other day, Washington has very strict regulations against carrying any kind of firearms in the city, and therefore there were not a lot of weapons there. It could have been horrifically way worse, and that's the thing that I think we need to take responsibility for. It's not about protecting us, it's about protecting the public who would be there, but it's also about protecting the important work that does get done on the people's behalf in that building.
Thanks, Susan. 2?
Yeah, like with what Steve said, I'm not aware of any legislation, and I don't know how it would go in terms of voting or getting it passed into law. But I think when I first started, I've had people come into my office with guns. I think it's a discussion that needs to be had. And like what Susan said, it's not so much for us as legislators, but sometimes we have multiple constituents that are there that are waiting, and I think it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Thanks, too. Carla?
Yeah, I don't foresee a bill like that moving forward at all. And I have a carry permit. And so I don't see that would be moving forward. However, what I do see is a huge push in a bipartisan manner for additional security in the Capitol. And I think that's a discussion that has gone on and on and on. And I think we have to actually come up with a plan. And I believe, and Susan, always correct me if I'm wrong, I know that's not difficult sometimes. So, but there is a working group that is continuing to have discussions about increased security measures. It's not about us, it is about the public, it is about staff, and it is about testifiers that would come up to the Capitol as well. So while I don't see a bill that would restrict that, I do foresee additional security measures being discussed and actually going through.
Thanks, Carla. And Tony.
Yeah, I think that there are security measures that can and should be talked about throughout the Capitol complex. The state office building, for example, under normal circumstances is wide open by design for people to come in and meet with their legislators. But there's downsides to that too. I actually had an individual that was stalking me that had mental issues, and that didn't end well. But I did always feel safe. The Sergeant at Arms and Capitol Security do a tremendous job. When we got there the other day to see the law enforcement presence on Thursday, made sure that I felt safe. I think that there are some things that we could do as far as locking down buildings and that sort of thing. A little bit more like the Senate building when that was designed, took that into consideration a little bit more. But there's a downside to that too. It's, like I said, it's designed for people to come and meet with their legislators. And so there are ways that we can be safer, but I don't want to hinder that at all.
All right.
Great.
Tony, back to Vivian.
This has been just a delightful conversation. I am so glad to have had so many of our legislators here. We're at that moment where we have to start pulling it back. And so I would like to ask each of our legislators to make a final comment and to include one perspective that you would like our members to take away with them today. And after the summaries, then we'll go to Betsy Stites. So let's see, we're starting with Steve Sandell. Guys.
I heard a congressman, U.S. congressman, interviewed in the wake of events on Tuesday and Wednesday, and he said he was an optimist, but the events had shaken his perspective and his philosophy. In order to be able to survive in this business, you have to be an optimism. You have to go to work each day, and you have to live each day believing that there are possibilities, and that the dedication of other people who have been elected to make rules, regulations, and policy for the state all are directed toward the same purpose. That is a viable, sustainable, and respectful and tolerant democracy. The frustration that I had in my first 2 years was that I didn't think all of us were acting that way. We talk about being a deliberative body, but frequently that deliberation is reduced, and decision making becomes a very small, a very narrow funnel. If we want to take something away from today, is that all of us on the screen are optimists, and I admire the work that each of the people on this screen does, and we each have our unique perspective and our unique work. We'll do the best we can for you. We need your support. We need your criticism, and we need a broad discussion to make this democracy work respectfully for all. And I want to say thanks to everybody on the call today, and those who organized. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Tu, can we have your final statement?
Yep. And I think just want to thank everyone for joining us and allowing us to join you, and to my colleagues here. I think I just want to leave off, I remember as a 16-year-old watching PBS TBT, where they have the British, Parliament going on. And I remember it was like the last day for the Prime Minister, and after like a contentious session, he left with, this message that, some may belittle politics or be turned off by it, but we know as we are engaged in it, it's where people stand tall. And although it has its many harsh contentions, it sets like our heartbeat a little bit faster. So if it's sometimes, on occasion, the place of low skullduggery, it is more often the place for the pursuit of noble causes. And I think everyone here believes that we're here to pursue noble causes. We're all passionate. Susan, Senator Carla Bigham, Representative Jurgens, Representative Sandell. I know they are very passionate in what they do, but they are are also very respectful of, you know, the work that we are engaged in and the seats that we hold. And we're just proud to represent all of you.
Thank you too. Carla?
Yeah, first, thank you, everybody. You know, I think Maya Angelou has always said it best, which is people are going to forget what you did. People are going to forget what you said, but they'll never forget the way they made you feel. So if there's one thing that I would take away from this, and this goes to this past week, if your elected official didn't speak up, how did that make you feel? If they're not responding to you, they're not showing up, how does that make you feel? Don't ever be disenfranchised, dissuaded. Always be an optimist about the future we have, because it's ours. And so be involved, call them, email them. That's what this is about. That's what the League of Women Voters is about participation and making sure that your voice is heard. So continue to do that. Don't be dissuaded, and make sure that you're paying attention. We're all going to be live streamed. So please bookmark the Senate page and the House page. Sign up for alerts on your favorite committee. Sign up on our websites for bills that are important to you. Like, be engaged. Don't be dissuaded. We are going to get through this. The light is on we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and just always stay involved, always stay engaged.
Thank you, Carla. Tony?
You know, as the only Republican on this panel, I want to point out that we all work together very well, better than I think the public is aware. We agree on more than we disagree. When we disagree on something, that's when you see it in the news. That's when it makes the headlines. But there are so many things that we agree on. And sometimes we might agree on the end result, but just how to get there. But we also, serving in this body is a privilege and an honor. And we all just went through an election. Not one of us won with 100% of the vote. So once that election is done, we represent everybody in our district, not just those that voted for us, or not just those that put our signs in their yards, but everybody in our district. We're not always going to agree. I'll listen to people. They might sway my decision, they might not. But I think that they have earned that, the right to be heard. And I'll continue to do that. I think it's an honor and a privilege. I'm humbled every time we take that oath of office, and I'm proud to be here. You know, I recently had some health issues, and I heard from as many Democrats as I did Republicans, and some of them on this panel here today were a few of them. And that just goes to show we're all part of a family working together. Sometimes families don't agree on things, but as long as we keep the end in mind, I think we'll be okay.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Those are inspiring words. So I'd like to have Susan close us out with this.
Thank you, Vivian. And I want to thank Vivian and Jody for doing a great job of moderating us and herding us cats, and Betsy for your work, and Mary as well, and the League of Women Voters for putting this on, and for everybody who's here, even though we can't see each other. I remember being at River Oaks just a year ago, and we were just starting to talk about COVID and how much has happened in that time. I also want to give a shout out to Representative Keith Franke, who couldn't be with us today, and it's good to have him on the team. He's a good partner as well. So, you know, a lot of this has been said, but I found a quote that I love from Paul Wellstone that I think reflects where I am in terms of perspective. Politics is about the improvement of people's lives, lessening human suffering, advancing the cause of peace and justice in our country and in the world. And when I think about particularly this past year and what COVID has done to all of us and people we love, and care about, and our economy and our kids in our schools. And as we've all seen and talked about, it has not only exacerbated existing disparities, shown lights on disparities that already existed. It has really been an eye-opener for a lot of people, and shined a light on some of the work we need to do. And then you think about the murder of George Floyd and the the civil unrest. After that, and the conversations that came about because of that, and the work that we began to do to try to address some of those injustices. And then you think about this important conversation about democracy that we're having. This is a time for us to realize that this is an article of faith, this work that we do, not just as elected legislators, but also as citizens. So I am just grateful for all of you for participating and being a part of this. I'm incredibly grateful for my partners and colleagues here. And let's keep doing the work to keep improving our lives, the lives of those around us, and to seek peace and justice. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Carla. And I want to thank you all for joining us for our annual legislative interviews. I would like to turn the program over now to Betsy Stites, our league president, for the closing. Thank you, everyone.
I am so proud. Oh, it's just giving me shivers. You all are just incredible representatives of the areas that we all are here to represent. And I can't say enough how much we appreciate all the important work that you do, and for coming and taking time today and sharing your views. It is critical. And even though we're under COVID, there were still 37 people in addition to all of us on here. So your voices are being heard and your perspectives are being heard. And that's what the League is all about, educating our citizenry so that we can also stand up and be counted as well. So thank you again. And I'll just have to do a shout out to Representative Juergens, because it's so important that you are here as a Republican, because we keep saying we are nonpartisan and we need all views and all perspectives. And so thank you. And I know Representative Frankie would be here too. His place is opening up today in St. Paul Park. Woohoo! And so, that's a great sign. We really appreciate that.
Folks need to try the Kirby if you haven't at Park Cafe. It's the best.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I keep hearing. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to get down.
The best roasted chicken around. Go try his chicken.
Just a shout out for January 21st. All of you who are members, we want you to bring a friend, a colleague, a relative, because we're having our sampler, which is, we call it speed dating, for learning about the different services and programs that we have with the League. So it'll be fun. It'll be on Zoom, but it'll be really good. And then, we've heard so much about redistricting today, and on February 13th, we're going to have a redistricting program. Stan Kowalski, who's one of our commissioners, and then Kathy Tingelstad, who has been very involved in redistricting at the state, done a lot of work. They're going to be talking about local redistricting, because we, as you all have said, it's new for, 10 years ago. Who remembers 10 years ago? So we need to start getting knowledgeable about it. And that's what we're going to be doing on February 13th. So again, thank you, everybody. It's great. Have a great rest of the weekend. And we appreciate everyone and all of you audience people out there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.